An internal report obtained by APTN News titled Indigenous Identity Fraud within NCNS alleges that more than 300 members of the Native Council of Nova Scotia, or NCNS, should be removed, something that might have an impact on their class action lawsuit. The report's author, Pierre Sabourin, wrote, "There are NCNS members whose only evidence of Indigenous ancestry is a family story from 220 years ago, or an ancestor with a last name that is only sometimes associated with Mi'kmaq people." Daryl Leroux is Associate Professor of Political Studies at the University of Ottawa. He researches the growing number of people claiming Indigenous ancestry, such as Métis groups in Eastern Canada. Leroux says the report is well researched.
This record in the ledger that's included in the report, because this individual actually went to the area and looked at these different sort of sources of information, it strongly suggests that the individual in question, the root ancestor, was born to Anglo-Saxon settlers.
The NCNS is a self-governing organization that represents over 3,500 members living off reserve, with or without status. According to the NCNS website, members self-identify as Mi'kmaq, claim ancestry and a connection to a community. Lorraine Augustine is Chief and President of the NCNS. She declined an on-camera interview, but wrote in an email statement to APTN News, "Work has been underway to review the contents of the Sabourin report, the release of which was a violation of the author's legal duty to NCNS and the members he identified. The work to date carried out by NCNS has demonstrated material errors in the work and conclusions. And NCNS has always approached the issue of Indigenous identity with the utmost care and rejects any suggestions by Mr. Sabourin that there is any tolerance for fraudulent claims." Kim Tallbear is a professor of Native Studies at the University of Alberta. She says ancestry is not enough.
Even if there's an actual ancestor 3 to 4 centuries ago, why is that a legitimate claim to being Mi'kmaq today?
In 2019, the Assembly of Nova Scotia Mi'kmaq Chiefs announced the Nova Scotia Mi'kmaq enrollment process, called Wulanaginu, This is Who We Are, developed by the Mi'kmaq Nation that determines who can access Mi'kmaq rights. Pam Palmer is a professor at the Toronto Metropolitan University, and she is Mi'kmaq. Her community is Eel River Bar. Palmer is concerned about the fact that the organization gets federal funding.
That if they're getting funds from federal or provincial governments or anyone that's targeted specifically for Mi'kmaq people, they too have a legal obligation to make sure that every single cent, which is very minimal, goes to actual Mi'kmaq people.
APTN News asked Patty Haidu, Minister of Indigenous Services Canada, how the government ensures funds go to organizations that have members with proven Indigenous identity.
In fact, the Government of Canada has the responsibility to work in a distinctions-based approach that is identified by Indigenous peoples. And so, for far too long, this country has told Indigenous people who is Indigenous and how.
Sabourin wrote the report while employed at the NCNS as a Citizen Information Officer. He delivered it to the NCNS leadership when he resigned on August 8, 2023. Sabourin declined an interview request, but did confirm he wrote the report. The 200-page report says in part, 300-plus members do not meet the bylaws, and cannot prove objectively verifiable evidence of Indigenous ancestry. This is 1/3 of the active membership. This includes at least 150 ATRA passport holders, those members who have been issued a card called the Aboriginal Rights Treaty Access Passport to hunt and fish under treaty rights. The passports were developed in the 1980s as part of the NCNS harvesting plan to access the treaty right to hunt, fish, and harvest for food, social, and ceremonial purposes. NCNS Chief and President Lorraine Augustine confirmed she received the report, but rather than responding to interview requests, wrote in an email on August 31, 2023, "The allegation of fraud is defamatory and carries serious consequences for those who this unfounded allegation is directed towards. any third party who participates in the release of this information and publicize the defamation will also attract liability. Palmater is shocked NCNS made threats.
The substantive nature of the report is something that really should be shared with all Mi'kmaq people. All of their membership should be made public to hold themselves to account. When you don't act transparently, it makes people think you have something to hide.
NCNS members have been hunting moose in the Cape Breton area for over 30 years. In 2017, the province revoked that right. So in 2019, 4 NCNS members representing all current and former ATRA passport holders filed a class action lawsuit against the Nova Scotia government, asking for $40 million in damages and requesting the passports be reinstated. According to Darryl LaRue, NCNS has a lot to lose if they lose membership.
They're probably going on the assumption that if they were to admit that this has been going on, that it has sort of poisoned their decision-making process and will harm the lawsuit that they filed.
In the statement of claim against the province, NCNS alleges that in fall 2016, the Assembly of Nova Scotia Mi'kmaq Chiefs complained to the province that the DNR should stop accepting ATRA passports as evidence of an Aboriginal or treaty right to hunt, and that soon after that complaint, the province declared that Aboriginal and treaty rights in Nova Scotia are collective rights held by the appropriate rights-bearing community, which corresponds to the 13 Mi'kmaq First Nations, 11 of who are represented by the Assembly of Nova Scotia Mi'kmaq Chiefs. The Assembly of Nova Scotia Mi'kmaq Chiefs and Nova Scotia's Department of Justice would not comment as the matter is before the courts. Tallbear says identity fraud within organizations harm Indigenous rights.
Because this is one of the problems we have with pretendians. They insert themselves into positions of power. They use those identity claims in order to gain power, to gain positions, to gain access to grants, to hunting rights, to fishing rights. They're using it in order to get something.
But the passports are still accepted by the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, and NCNS members continue to have the right to harvest lobster for food, social, and ceremony. DFO confirmed this to APTN News in an emailed statement. In the case of members of the Native Council of Nova Scotia, the required proof of designation would be the Aboriginal and Treaty Rights Access Passport. Palmater says this is not right.
Only nations have Aboriginal and treaty rights, have land rights, not organizations. And the Supreme Court of Canada has been very clear that simply being a member of a political organization does not attach you to a nation or a historical community.
Chief and President Lorraine Augustine of the Native Council of Nova Scotia wrote in an email to APTN News, the NCNS will make a public statement once their review of the Sabrin report is complete. The Attorney General of Nova Scotia is appealing the class action certification in the Nova Scotia Court of Appeal. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Jabuktuk, also known as Halifax.